So how on earth is this bill going to help us get at organized crime?
Well, firstly, I would say that, certainly with people who get federal sentences, it's not true. We're always saying, people are in jail for drugs. That's just not true. People are in jail for other crimes, and predominantly violent crimes if they're in the federal system, but they're not, but they are, it's true in the sense that most of them are drug users. But the people who are, leading the path on the organized crime front, of course, are, for a variety of reasons, find ways to be immune from prosecution. So it's not likely that this or anything else, short of something very drastic, is going to affect that. But I'm reminded that we've drawn more people into the drug business, into the trafficking business. We've got people in trafficking cocaine who are never in the business. Most of the gangs we have are in BC, or they're basically people have been, it's less than a decade, 4, 5, 6 years. And so I think there needs to be something there that tells these people that there will be a consequence to involvement. And one of the things that we know is absolutely true on lesser things, never mind going to prison, that the organized crime people and people involved in the drug business will change their method of doing business to avoid detection and avoid consequences. No question about that.
So this bill is useless?
No, I'm thinking I think it's helpful in part. I'm saying it's helpful in part. I think it is. I guess the single biggest plus of the bill, and I'm reminded that it still doesn't take away from the courts having the opportunity to move up to what the maximums provide. I mean, that of course never happens. But I'm thinking a very important component of this is the notion of mandatory penalties for certain cases. It is denunciation. It is doing more than what we've been able to do thus far in trying to provide any kind of effective sentence. I mean, is 6 months or a year an effective sentence? I don't think so. It certainly can't capture what was normally required in terms of trying to rehabilitate somebody, given, again, I'm reminded, the average person involved historically on the production side alone, and I also know for traffickers it's a similar kind of thing, we're talking people who have 13-year criminal histories, 7 priors. It isn't the person who's, generally, it's a first-timer. That's just not true. Our jails are not filled with people who've never been in trouble before, and our jails are not filled with people who are in there for drug offenses. You look at their histories. You look at histories of property offenders in Canada. They have also histories of violence. So I think
so you're saying, though, that this law, the present laws we have do not work. We heard quite convincing evidence last night, from witnesses who said that we're kidding ourselves if we think that this law is going to work, because criminals don't read the law and they don't listen to parliamentary debates.
No, I would say that's true.
They're quite convinced that they're not ever going to get caught. Yeah. So why are we wasting our time talking about it?
And again, I would say I'm coming from saying that it needs to be more. It needs to be more than it is. And I'm reminded that the link in the bill between the involvement in organized crime, if I recall correctly, it's a minimum of 2 years, right? So that puts somebody into federal time. I think that's, being out of business for a couple years is certainly better than what they're getting now.
Thank you, Senator. I will subside.
I think the position on both sides of this particular discussion are now clear. Senator Angus, suivi par le Sénateur Joyal. Senator Angus.
Just a couple of questions, sir. Thank you for your testimony. I'm assuming that you don't consider the bill to be profoundly undemocratic, like the other witness.
No.
I hope that's a fair assumption.
And I know in part I say that because I know that if you look at, for example, in trafficking and in the case of production or exporting, it's incredibly small percentage of people who are Aboriginal or Afro-American. We're talking like 3-4% at least in British Columbia. We're not talking, and I know it's much larger in the prairies and in Ontario, and I also agree with my friend about the whole matter of discrimination. But I'm reminded that that's been going on in a zillion different ways through our criminal justice system before we were entertaining this legislation.
You talked about these grow-ups, and many of them, and you drew the parallel between BC and the U.S. states nearby that don't have them. Would they be part of organized crime, existing, as you say they do, to such an extent, and even stealing hydro?
Who would be?
These grow-up organization. I don't want to use the word organization, but you went into some detail about these huge grow-ups in BC, and I'm wondering if that's just casual.
No. I would say in the, if you think of what it takes to establish a grow operation that we would call commercially viable, like you're doing it to make a profit, the expectation is more than one crop, which is generally anything over what we would say is 5 lights, a 5-light operation. You have to be connected. You have to know people who can assist you in the construction of the garden, as they call it. You need to have at the get-go a distribution outlet. If you're trafficking in drugs in British Columbia, you pay tax to organized crime. You don't just set up shop and go about your business and traffic drugs. You're going to be working with somebody who handles a territory. And so organized crime is into it up to their eyeballs. Street-level gangs, mid-level gangs, then up through more traditional outlaw biker gangs, and then, of course, like mafia and the cartels, etc. But there's no question about that they're, I mean, all one needs to do is look again at the evolution of new gangs, and they're what would seem to be a fairly clear connection between these newly developing gangs and traditional gangs like Hells Angels. Well, although of course I understand that Hells Angels is not an organized crime group, but if it was, I mean, there seems to be a connection going there. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever. And the hydro theft, what's even disturbing is the larger the grow, the more likely someone is to steal hydro. No question about that.
And my other question, I was noting your testimony at the other place in the House of Commons Committee about comparing Canada and the U.S. in terms of mandatory minimum sentencing. And yesterday we had a number of you. I don't know whether you were able to follow our hearing yesterday, were you?
No, I'm sorry.
We had on video conference some witnesses from Washington, D.C., and from New York on the subject generally of this bill and the good and the bad of mandatory minimum sentences. But could you just describe what I understand you believe is a substantial difference between the situation here in Canada, as reflected in C-15 or otherwise, and the U.S. situation?
Yeah, I would say it's hugely different, because in the United States they, have historically moved to a place where people are getting locked up for outrageously long periods of time, and at some point you have to say, well, what's the point in that? There's this, people may know is that have been times and places in the United States where there's more people in jail than in university. They just simply, I would say, have taken it too far. But to say that didn't have some kind of positive effect on reducing crime is wrong, because there's, in fact, the most recent studies that will show that you can influence the rate of crime, and they have studied this recently in the United States, by the releases from prison. And the crime will go up increasingly depending on more releases and the seriousness of those offenders.